Welcome back to the Town Hall Media booth here at CPAC. I'm at Morrissey of HotAir.com, and we're going to talk a little immigration right now with Mike Howell from the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org. Great think tank, great clearinghouse website, by the way. If you have any questions on any issues in politics, really anything that's not, if you're looking for poll data, don't go to Heritage Foundation. Anything else, though, go to heritage.org, and there's a lot of great scholars there, and Mike is one of them. Let's talk a little bit about immigration. You know, we're not actually hearing a lot about immigration this time around because I think the sense that there's a crisis has kind of dialed down here. I was last here 2 years ago, and immigration was a huge topic. And I'm hearing a little bit about it, but is my impression incorrect that it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue this time around?
Right. The administration has done a ton of things to kind of tamp down the surge at the border. But just as we're sitting here today, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has shut down the Remain in Mexico program, which basically asks that people wait in Mexico before they get in. So we'll see what actually happens, but that's the single most important thing the administration's done. So my worry is that gearing up, getting towards warmer months, we're going to see another crisis again. And unfortunately, the resistance judges, the obstructors, are acting as absolute co-conspirators with this illegal alien wave.
So, yeah, I mean, the Ninth Circuit weighed in on it. Was it yesterday that they weighed in on it, or was it?
I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday. It was brought to my attention this morning.
Yeah, and other appellate courts have already ruled on this in the administration's favor. Am I correct about that?
Right. The morass of litigation is very complicated.
Right.
But this is an important one, given that the Ninth Circuit covers a lot of border territory.
Yes, it does. It's California, Arizona, New Mexico, possibly, I think, too. It doesn't cover Texas. I know that the Fifth Circuit covers Texas.
Yep.
So clearly, this is going to have to go to the Supreme Court now,
right?
Because you've got a split in the appellate circuits. It's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. What do you think the likelihood is that the Supreme Court's going to uphold the Ninth Circuit on this?
Right. Well, the Supreme Court has been very good on the immigration cases that they've heard, and when you saw the public charge decision with Gorsuch, he went off on basically the obstruction of these nationwide injunctions. He sent a signal basically to these district court judges who are acting completely out of school. So I think when they see this court case come up to them, which hopefully it does soon, they're going to smack it down, and smack it down as they should. There's really no good legal argument against this. It's completely within the prerogative of the President of the United States to reach an agreement with a foreign country. That agreement is it's consistent with our immigration laws. It's consistent with immigration norms across the world and throughout history. It makes complete sense that you just don't let people in the country to either hear their claim or not and let them stay. And so it's very important that the Supreme Court gets involved quickly and we get this program back on track.
Now, even beyond that, though, there's been other wins for the administration in the foreign policy area. They've reached safe third country agreements with Mexico, and I don't know if they did with Mexico directly, but with Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Belize. I think they did finally get Belize, which are that's the block of countries that's just south of Mexico. So anybody going through those countries to emigrate would have to request asylum in those countries before they come to the United States.
Right.
So in a sense, they've kind of put a cork on Central America. Even without that program in Mexico, it's going to be difficult for people to migrate up through Mexico into the United States. Right.
Well, the difference is if you don't have the Remain in Mexico program, that's in Mexico is where you hear the claim of, hey, you just passed through El Salvador. You should have made your asylum claim there. They're going to be making their claim in the U.S. and waiting in the U.S. And as we saw with the last crisis, we don't have the facilities to handle this amount of people crossing the border.
Right.
And so that's where I'm concerned.
So it is something of concern, and again, this is something the Supreme Court's going to have to take up fairly quickly. Now, let's talk a little bit about the connection between the wins that the administration has had over the last 2 years on immigration and wage growth.
Right.
Because The Economist had an interesting article out 2 weeks ago. And if you've ever read The Economist, you know that The Economist is not exactly MAGA country, right?
Exactly.
It's a center-left publication for the most part. It's very well done, but it's a center-left publication. And the article that they had was Donald Trump's immigration policies have had a positive impact on low-income wage growth, right? And they're acknowledging it by dialing down the flood of workers into the United States. It has allowed the bottom quartile or bottom quintile of wages to increase most rapidly, and that's where most of the wage growth is occurring. And then they say, and that will work for a while. And they have some historical analysis of this and say, but at a certain point, if you are too restrictionist and you keep the restrictions on too long, you lose the dynamism which allows you greater economic growth. Now, so I have two responses to this, and I'd like to get your opinions on this. One is, once you get control of the border and once you get control of your immigration policy, then you can make a decision how many people you want to let in. You can do it legally, and it's rationally, and that way you're not unnecessarily burdening your own lower income population. Two, do you see that dynamic actually working? So would you agree with me on the first one? And two, do you actually see that dynamic as something that the U.S. needs to be concerned about in terms of future economic growth?
The first one, I'm completely with you. I think it's beyond dispute when The Economist is even writing about it, that these immigration policies have helped the American worker, especially those in the bottom quintile. As for part two, in terms of immigration, growth in targeted areas, we need to have a very honest conversation. It needs to be happening with the American people and not with ag lobbyists who are currently running around Congress as we speak, looking to increase the amount of indentured servants they import, that they can pay less than they'd pay an American. But the conversation we need to have is, what do we need in this country? And that's what the merit-based system that the Heritage Foundation has written about so much will do. That's what the administration is pushing for. So it needs to be a conversation of, where do we need people? Why aren't we creating those types of workers in the U.S.? In terms of U.S. population, like, what do we need to do? Is one of the things we care about a lot at the Heritage Foundation is family formation. We want to see young people getting married, having kids, investing in their communities and those family structures. The best way to start a family is, to have a reliable income and wage. So we want to see, employment benefiting, these people who are looking to form families. And I think it's up to the American people to decide if someone's better suited to do that with or without, more legal immigration competing with it.
I agree with that. And I think the question then becomes, what's the proper level? And I don't know that there's one number for that, right? I mean, I think it really depends on what the economic conditions are, what the labor pool is here.
Right.
But having control of the border is sort of the first step.
Right.
And then you can have conversations about all the rest of this. What is the Heritage Foundation, what's your policy or what's your outlook on like a guest worker program? Because that was another thing that The Economist mentioned.
Right. Right now, the guest worker program is a little bit ham-fisted, and it's unpredictable, and it happens with too much influence from the lobbyists and the swamp. I mean, just this week they're talking about rolling out numbers of, a big magnitude would be one of Trump's biggest increases. So what we want to see is a just public and a rational conversation. We don't want to see the benefits accruing just to, big companies that want to get away with paying substandard wages.
Right.
It needs to be upfront. There needs to be an argument made as to why they cannot, why the American conditions aren't working for them and why they need to import this other labor. And right now the law is a little scattershot on it, but we want to see more people do that. And I will add that before we do any of this stuff, the most important thing is, what are we going to do with all the illegals in the country?
Right.
There are a ton of illegals, so many that we can't even count, and the government refuses to count. They've been lying to us for years and years. The number's been at 12 million for, 2 decades. Yeah, right. I've been at, 190 pounds since high school, if that's the case. It just doesn't add up. So we need to take significant inventories who in this country illegally, get them out of the country before we can even start talking about bringing more people in. So that's where we stand. So
when Mick Mulvaney is recorded in England saying, we're desperate for more workers, that's a concern for you.
I would like to see the administration, justify why that concern is. I think it presents a major political concern for the administration that they're going to have to address. I mean, the president ran on a platform of, American first and putting the American worker, ahead. So it's hard to make sense of, the politics of the sound bites from the acting chief of staff. But I think, the voters are certainly going to have a lot of questions to ask, and that's something they're going to have to address.
And again, you kind of expect to see this come up at CPAC, and it might be coming up in some breakout sessions here.
Yep.
Not really a main ballroom topic. Does that surprise you this time around at CPAC?
You know, the conservative movement doesn't have an absolute orthodoxy on this in terms of when it comes down to the numbers. Yeah. You could go to 10 different think tanks and get 10 different answers. You could go to a bunch of Republican firebrand, congressmen and senators who have different views on this as well. So I'd love to see this conversation on the main stage because it is the most important conversation when it comes to immigration. That's what it all boils down to, control and amount. And if you look at the polling of the American people, it has been consistent for decades. The American people want less immigration. And so I think, the problem for us is that we want to see the consent of the governed be a principle that is really in play here. And we've had too long in Washington. The people want one thing, Washington does something else. So I would love to see, Washington and the immigration system actually react to what the voters and not, the Chamber of Commerce and other, people who just want cheap labor want.
Mike Howell from the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org. Is there any other, you're on Twitter or anything like that?
M. Howell tweets, give me a follow. Join an illustrious club of like 250 people. So
there you go, at M. Howell tweets. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com here at the Town Hall Media booth on CPAC's Media Row. We'll be back with more.